The story begins with a boy named Daniel who is constantly bullied by the students at school. He isn't good at academics, nor is he able to stand up for himself, making him an easy target for everyone around him. To make matters worse, Daniel's life outside school is just as heartbreaking. His mother is battling cancer, but the family doesn't have enough money to pay for her treatment. Every day, Daniel watches her slowly grow weaker, knowing there is nothing he can do to save her. His father works as a firefighter, but the stress and misery of life have driven him to alcoholism. Whenever he comes home drunk, he takes out all of his frustration by brutally beating Daniel. Despite enduring all this pain, Daniel refuses to give up on life. Deep down, he believes that suffering is simply a part of his fate. To distract himself from his miserable reality, he buys a camera and starts recording everything around him. Holding the camera gives him a sense of happiness and purpose that he has never experienced before. Unfortunately, the people around him remain just as cruel as ever. One day, Daniel takes his camera to school, hoping to capture everyday moments. Instead, the bullies corner him once again. They beat him, humiliate him, and even use his own camera to record the assault, laughing as they make fun of him. One night, while Daniel is recording himself in his bedroom, his father returns home drunk and demands that he open the door. Daniel refuses because he knows exactly what will happen if he lets him in. Furious, his father begins trying to smash the door down, terrifying Daniel. The following morning, Daniel leaves for school with his cousin Charles, the person he spends most of his free time with. After learning that Daniel has started recording video blogs, Charles encourages him to continue because he enjoys watching them. Later that day, Daniel is filming some girls practicing a dance during the morning assembly. One of the girls walks over and politely asks him to stop recording because she feels uncomfortable. Daniel notices that several other students are also recording the performance, yet she only asks him to turn off his camera. Feeling as though people see him differently, Daniel quietly lowers the camera without arguing and walks away. Afterward, he wanders around school filming different places. Before long, the same group of bullies surrounds him again. They snatch away his camera, insult him in front of everyone, pull his hair, slap him repeatedly, and humiliate him. Daniel doesn't have the courage to fight back. Once they are finished, they throw his camera onto the ground with enough force to damage it. Fortunately, it survives without breaking. As if this kind of abuse has become a normal part of his daily life, Daniel simply picks up the camera and continues recording. Daniel never tells Charles about the bullying because he worries his cousin will think he's strange. Later, Charles invites him to a school party that evening and insists that he come. Daniel doesn't enjoy parties, so he declines, pretending that he has homework to finish. Charles also advises Daniel to stop carrying the camera everywhere he goes. However, the camera has become everything to Daniel. It is his escape from reality, and he simply ignores the advice. That evening, Daniel heads outside once again with his camera. This time, he records several drug dealers openly selling narcotics in his neighborhood. Because of the large camera he is carrying, they quickly notice him. They order him to stop filming immediately. When Daniel refuses, they attack him and chase him away. Later that night, while Daniel is quietly doing his homework, his father enters the room. Daniel nervously asks what he wants, but instead of answering, his father begins beating him mercilessly. His only crime is refusing to open the door the previous night. The assault leaves Daniel feeling as though he regrets ever being born. Unable to bear staying at home any longer, Daniel wipes away his tears and decides to attend the school party with Charles after all. Even though he had originally refused, he still brings his camera because he wants to record everything happening there. At the party, however, another misunderstanding occurs. A man believes Daniel is secretly filming his girlfriend and aggressively threatens him before chasing him away. Heartbroken, Daniel walks outside and begins crying. Moments later, one of his classmates named Jack finds him and excitedly tells him they have discovered something incredible. Jack insists they bring Daniel's camera because they need to record it. Curious, Daniel follows him. The two boys run deep into the woods until they arrive at an open field, where Charles is already waiting beside a mysterious hole in the ground. Curious about what lies beneath, Daniel immediately begins filming. The hole appears small from the surface, but once they climb down, they realize it leads into an enormous underground cave. As they venture deeper inside, Daniel suddenly begins struggling to breathe. He begs the others to turn back, but Jack ignores his warning and continues exploring. Eventually, Jack discovers a strange blue crystal glowing deep within the cave. Fascinated, he tells Daniel to record it. However, the powerful energy radiating from the crystal begins damaging the camera lens. None of them understands what they are looking at. The moment Jack touches the crystal, its blue glow suddenly changes to a bright red. Instantly, all three boys begin bleeding from their noses. Terrified by what has happened, they panic and flee the cave as quickly as possible. Several weeks pass and the three friends meet again. This time, they are secretly practicing incredible new abilities. The mysterious crystal has granted each of them the power of telekinesis. Scientifically speaking, telekinesis is the ability to manipulate objects using nothing but the power of the mind. Although all three receive the same powers, Daniel learns to control them much faster than the others. He can stop a ball in midair with nothing more than a thought, while Charles and Jack struggle to perform even the simplest tasks after weeks of practice. Daniel quickly masters moving everything from tiny objects to massive ones, making his abilities far superior to theirs. The thing that excites Daniel most is that he no longer needs to hold his camera with his hands. Using telekinesis, he can make the camera float around him, allowing him to record not only other people but also himself. The boys later return to the cave, only to discover that a mudslide has completely sealed the entrance. While searching for another way inside, they notice police officers patrolling the area. Wanting to avoid attracting attention, they quietly leave. Soon afterward, they begin wondering what they should actually do with their extraordinary powers. Since they are still mischievous teenagers, they use their abilities for harmless entertainment. At school, they play tricks on girls using telekinesis. At a shopping mall, they secretly throw objects around and frighten a little girl by making a teddy bear float through the air. Charles attempts to steal a piece of chewing gum directly out of another boy's mouth, but accidentally knocks him over instead. Jack successfully moves an entire parked car from one location to another. However, using so much power causes his nose to start bleeding, revealing that there are limits to their abilities. Daniel, determined to push his powers even further, learns to generate an invisible force field around his body. To prove it works, Charles swings a hammer directly at Daniel's hand. The hammer never even touches him because the invisible barrier blocks it completely. Daniel later manipulates the food on his plate, reshaping it into the face of a waitress. The bizarre sight frightens the waitress so badly that she runs away in terror. At first, the three friends enjoy using their powers to fulfill every fantasy they have ever imagined. But as time passes, their harmless pranks gradually become more reckless and dangerous. Eventually, Daniel completely loses control while driving. Frustrated by a car honking behind them, he uses his telekinesis to violently throw the vehicle off the road. The car crashes into a nearby pond. Horrified by what he has done, Daniel rushes over and sees the driver trapped inside. He wants to use his powers to rescue the man, but Charles stops him, believing Daniel is too emotionally unstable to control his abilities safely. Instead, Jack pulls the injured man out of the vehicle. Although badly hurt, he is still alive. Daniel desperately begs Charles not to call the police because he fears they will discover the truth about their powers. Charles ignores him and contacts emergency services anyway, ultimately saving the man's life. Realizing how dangerous their abilities have become, Charles gathers everyone together and establishes two important rules. The first rule is that they must never use their powers on any living creature. The second rule is that whenever they become angry, they must learn to control themselves. Charles reminds Daniel that someone nearly died because of his actions. Daniel admits that he never intended to hurt anyone and only wanted to stop the reckless driver. He sincerely accepts responsibility for what happened, and the others forgive him. From then on, the three boys continue practicing their powers behind an abandoned factory. Before long, Jack becomes the first of them to successfully fly. Inspired by him, Charles immediately attempts to do the same, but crashes face first into the ground. Daniel then uses his telekinesis to reduce the weight of his own body. Slowly, he begins floating into the air. Although balancing himself is difficult at first, he eventually masters the technique and learns how to fly with complete control. For Daniel, lifting his body high into the clouds had become effortless. Flying through the sky felt like living inside a dream. One day, the three friends decided to play football high above the clouds. While they were enjoying themselves, an airplane suddenly collided with Jack at tremendous speed, sending him spiraling toward the ground. The shock left Jack completely terrified, preventing him from using his powers in time to save himself. Just before he could crash to his death, Daniel caught him with his telekinesis and saved his life. Jack was overwhelmed with relief and excitement. It had been his first encounter with a flying airplane while soaring through the sky, making the experience both terrifying and exhilarating. From that day on, flying became a normal part of their lives. Jack even began flying home directly from school instead of walking. Daniel happily admitted, "I've never had as much fun in my life as I'm having now." Even with all the excitement his new abilities had brought him, Daniel never stopped recording himself with his camera. His greatest dream was still to travel to Tibet one day and spend time living among Buddhist monks. One day Jack tells Daniel, "You're really special. You can control that camera perfectly with your mind, while I can't even type properly on a keyboard. I tried once and the keyboard shattered into pieces." Jack then suggests that they participate in the school's talent show. He says, "Now that we have telekinesis, we can perform incredible tricks and make everyone believe it's magic." At first, Daniel refuses because he dislikes being the center of attention. However, after Jack repeatedly convinces him, Daniel finally agrees. The following day they take part in the talent show. When Jack walks onto the stage, the audience immediately bursts into applause because he is already one of the most popular students in school. However, the moment Daniel steps onto the stage, the students begin laughing and mocking him. They wonder what someone like him could possibly do. Their laughter disappears the instant Daniel begins his performance. He takes a deck of playing cards out of his pocket to perform a magic trick. Just as he is about to begin, Jack intentionally bumps into him, causing the cards to scatter across the floor. Everyone assumes Daniel will have to bend down and pick them up one by one. Instead, without touching a single card, Daniel silently uses his telekinesis to lift every card off the ground and send them flying straight back into his hand. The audience erupts into applause. He then continues performing even more astonishing feats, making balls float and juggle themselves in midair. Throughout the evening, Daniel performs one unbelievable trick after another, leaving everyone in complete disbelief. The students cannot understand how someone they always considered a loser has suddenly become so talented and intelligent. By the next morning, Daniel has become famous throughout the entire school. Everyone suddenly wants to speak with him, befriend him, and spend time with him. None of them realize that it isn't Daniel's natural talent impressing them, it's his supernatural powers. Overnight, Daniel finally receives everything he had dreamed about his entire life. One girl even becomes interested in getting intimate with him. However, Daniel becomes so drunk that he ends up vomiting on her. Jack reassures him by saying that these things happen sometimes and that it isn't a big deal. Daniel, however, feels deeply humiliated by the incident and angrily lashes out at Jack. Ever since obtaining his powers, Daniel has found it increasingly difficult to control his anger, a flaw that will eventually become one of his greatest weaknesses. From that point onward, Daniel begins isolating himself from everyone else. One day he catches a spider and deliberately tears off its legs before killing it. To his surprise, he realizes that taking a life doesn't make him feel guilty at all. Meanwhile, his mother's condition continues to worsen because she is unable to receive the medication she desperately needs. One day, Daniel's father secretly searches his bedroom. When he discovers the expensive camera, he immediately becomes furious. Believing Daniel spent money that should have gone toward his mother's medicine, he accuses him of stealing from the family simply to satisfy his own desires. Daniel desperately tries to explain that he never used his mother's treatment money to buy the camera, but his father refuses to listen. Instead, he begins beating Daniel once again while trying to seize the camera. After enduring years of abuse, Daniel finally reaches his breaking point. Using his telekinesis, he grabs his father by the throat, lifts him into the air, and violently throws him across the room with such force that he is unable to stand back up. At that exact moment, both Charles and Jack suddenly begin bleeding from their noses because Daniel has used an enormous amount of telekinetic energy. Concerned, Jack immediately goes to find Daniel. He discovers him attempting to fly through the middle of a violent thunderstorm. Jack asks Daniel to come with him, hoping to calm him down. Daniel, however, is consumed by rage. He repeatedly tells Jack to stay away. When Jack refuses to leave despite several warnings, Daniel unleashes a massive electrical discharge that strikes Jack directly, killing him instantly. The following morning, police discover Jack's half-burned body lying in the middle of a field. His death devastates everyone who knew him. Charles, however, immediately becomes suspicious of Daniel because there were no reports of lightning striking anywhere in town that night. During Jack's funeral, Daniel continues recording everything with his camera. Seeing this infuriates Charles. He demands that Daniel stop filming, believing the funeral is no place for a camera. Daniel completely ignores him. Charles attempts to snatch away the camera so he can watch whatever Daniel recorded the previous night. Daniel refuses to let him touch it and silently walks away. Despite everything, Daniel is genuinely heartbroken over Jack's death. After everyone leaves the cemetery, he quietly returns to Jack's grave alone and apologizes for what happened. Sadly, his apology comes far too late. The next day, Daniel returns to school. There, he encounters the same girl he had vomited on during the party. She has already told everyone at school about the embarrassing incident. As a result, students once again begin mocking Daniel and calling him a loser. What they fail to realize is that Daniel is no longer the helpless victim they used to bully. To teach one of the boys a lesson, Daniel uses his telekinesis to rip every tooth out of the student's mouth before flushing them down a bathroom toilet. Now completely isolated from everyone else, Daniel begins talking only to his camera. He spends countless hours reading books about human evolution. Eventually, he convinces himself that he is an apex predator, the most powerful species in existence. He reasons that just as a lion feels no guilt after killing its prey because it is simply following its natural instincts, he too should feel no remorse for killing those weaker than himself. Slowly, Daniel loses all sense of empathy. Before long, Charles confronts him once again because Daniel has attacked another innocent person, violating the rules they had all agreed upon. Charles desperately tries to convince him to stop before things become even worse. Daniel, however, becomes furious. He explains that he is on his way to buy medicine for his dying mother and accuses Charles of wasting his time with meaningless lectures. Charles realizes Daniel intends to commit another crime because he doesn't have enough money to pay for the medicine. He attempts to stop him, but Daniel's telekinetic powers have become far stronger than his own. No matter what Charles says, he cannot change Daniel's mind. Eventually, Charles gives up and walks away. When Daniel reaches the pharmacy, the store owner tells him that his father still hasn't paid the previous bill and refuses to provide any more medicine on credit. With no other option left, Daniel decides to steal. He puts on his father's firefighter uniform as a disguise and sets out to rob people. He orders them to hand over all their money immediately. Even though his face is partially hidden, several people recognize him as Daniel. When they try to resist, Daniel attacks them. Using his telekinesis, he throws people through the air with incredible force. The brutal way he beats them makes it painfully obvious that he has completely lost control of himself. After savagely assaulting them, he steals all of their money. But even that isn't enough. Soon afterward, Daniel enters a grocery store to carry out an even larger robbery. This time, he doesn't even bother making demands. He immediately attacks the shopkeeper and begins stuffing cash into his bag. As Daniel tries to escape, the shopkeeper pulls out a gun and fires at him. Reacting instinctively, Daniel redirects the bullet with his telekinesis. Instead of hitting him, the bullet strikes a nearby petrol pump. A massive explosion erupts, engulfing the entire area in flames and setting Daniel's body on fire. He is rushed to the hospital with severe burns. When his father comes to visit him, he delivers devastating news. Daniel's mother has passed away. As he says those words, his father breaks down in tears. Even in that heartbreaking moment, however, he blames Daniel for everything. He accuses him of not being there during his mother's final moments, saying she died without her son beside her. Overcome with grief and anger, Daniel looks around the hospital room and says, "I know you're all listening, so apologize to me right now." Daniel's father, consumed by rage, is just about to strangle him when Daniel suddenly regains consciousness in the hospital. The moment he wakes up, his telekinetic powers spiral completely out of control. A massive burst of energy erupts from his body, triggering another explosion that tears through his hospital room. At the same time, Charles suddenly begins bleeding heavily from his nose. Having experienced this before, he immediately realizes that Daniel must have unleashed an enormous amount of power. Moments later, he sees news reports on television showing the explosion at the hospital and understands that something has gone terribly wrong. Charles rushes to stop Daniel, but by the time he arrives, it is already too late. Daniel's supernatural abilities have now been exposed to the entire world, and armed officers are preparing to shoot him. Daniel notices his father lying on the ground below. In a burst of anger, he hurls him through the air using his telekinesis. Before his father can hit the ground, Charles catches him and safely lowers him to the ground. Instead of appreciating the rescue, Daniel becomes furious. Charles's decision to save his father only convinces Daniel that Charles has turned against him. Realizing Daniel has completely lost his sanity, Charles decides to get his girlfriend to safety. She had insisted on coming with him despite the danger. As Charles tries to leave with her, Daniel violently throws an entire helicopter toward them. Then, using his telekinesis, Daniel drags both Charles and his car to the top of a tall tower. Charles desperately tries to open the car door, but it is jammed shut. Without warning, Daniel tears Charles away from the vehicle and then throws both the car and Charles's girlfriend off the edge of the tower. Until this moment, Charles had never possessed power equal to Daniel's. However, seeing the woman he loves falling to her death unlocks tremendous new strength within him. His telekinetic abilities surge dramatically, allowing him to save her just before she crashes. After ensuring she is safe, Charles returns to Daniel one final time, hoping he can still reason with him. Daniel, however, has no interest in talking anymore. Instead, he violently hurls Charles backward. By now, every news station is broadcasting the battle live. Countless phones, cameras, and television crews are recording every moment, revealing the existence of telekinetic powers to the entire world. Enraged by being watched, Daniel uses his abilities to rip every phone and camera out of people's hands. Charles desperately pleads with him. "Look at me, Daniel. You have to stop this. You're hurting innocent people." But Daniel no longer sees Charles as his friend. In his mind, Charles became his enemy the moment he saved Daniel's father. Filled with resentment, Daniel shouts, "I threw him down. Why did you catch him?" He becomes convinced that Charles, just like everyone else, has completely misunderstood him. Consumed by rage, Daniel tears an entire city bus off the street and hurls it directly at Charles. Charles narrowly escapes being crushed beneath the massive vehicle but suffers serious injuries. Knowing Daniel has completely lost control, Charles drags him away from the crowded streets in an attempt to prevent more innocent people from getting hurt. Daniel responds by ripping dozens of nearby cars into the air and launching them toward Charles one after another. During the violent battle, Charles crashes into a streetlight. The impact electrocutes him, causing him to lose consciousness and collapse. When Charles finally regains consciousness, he tries to carry Daniel away before anyone else gets hurt. However, police officers quickly surround them and order both of them to surrender. Charles repeatedly begs the officers not to shoot. Despite his warnings, the police open fire. One of the bullets strikes Charles in the hand. At that exact moment, Daniel regains consciousness. Enraged, he unleashes another burst of telekinetic force, throwing every police officer violently through the air. He then begins destroying everything around him. Buildings, vehicles, and anything nearby become weapons under his control. Charles attempts to escape the destruction, but Daniel catches up to him. Daniel still believes they have unfinished business. The two launch themselves into the sky before crashing down near a large statue. Although Daniel has suffered severe injuries, he refuses to stop fighting. Soon, even more police officers arrive and unleash a barrage of gunfire. Daniel effortlessly blocks every bullet before it can reach him. His anger has now surpassed every limit. Completely consumed by hatred, he attacks everyone around him without hesitation. Charles finally realizes there is no longer any trace of the friend he once knew. Daniel has completely lost himself. Using his telekinesis, Daniel prepares to tear apart an entire building, intending to reduce everything inside to rubble and flames. When Charles realizes that hundreds of innocent people are about to die, he desperately begs Daniel to stop. Daniel no longer has any control over his emotions or his powers. There is only one way left to stop him. Charles grabs a large spear from a nearby statue. Summoning every ounce of strength he has left, he drives the spear straight through Daniel's body. The fatal blow kills Daniel instantly. Moments later, police officers rush in to arrest Charles. Before they can capture him, however, Charles escapes. Several weeks later, Charles is seen traveling across some of the most beautiful places in the world. Eventually, his journey brings him to the mountains of Tibet. He has carried Daniel's camera with him the entire time. Standing among the peaceful hills, Charles turns the camera on and begins recording one final message. He apologizes to Daniel, saying he never wanted to kill his best friend and only did what was necessary to save countless innocent lives. He promises Daniel that he will continue searching for the truth behind the mysterious crystal, hoping to discover how they received their powers and whether others like them exist somewhere in the world. Daniel had always dreamed of visiting Tibet one day. Unable to fulfill that dream himself, Charles leaves Daniel's camera behind in the mountains, allowing it to continue recording the breathtaking landscape. Eventually, the battery runs out. The camera falls silent forever, disappearing into the remote hills of Tibet. With that emotional final moment, the movie comes to an end.